Hi, I'm Mrs. D Math. Thanks for joining me today. If you've been here before, welcome back. Today we're going to go over how to model and solve two-step equations in 7th grade math. So let's get started. So with the two-step equation, your goal is still going to be to isolate the variable. So anytime you have an x or any variable that represents an unknown, you're going to want to get that by itself. We want to isolate that on one side of the equal sign. We do this to solve for that value by keeping the equation balanced. So the equal sign is the center of your equation, and that's what we need to do, is keep everything on both sides equivalent. So we're going to start here with a key. So a green rectangle represents our x. A purple rectangle represents our negative x. Sometimes those are just called tiles, and so we are using pictures of algebra tiles here to help us solve the problem. And then your square tiles are equal to 1 if they're green and -1 if they're purple. So here we have a two-step equation. There is a video going over how to model and solve one-step equations. If you missed that, you can find that linked below. And so today though, we're going to go over two-step equations, which means on the left side I have two green x's, so that's two positive x's, and I have two -1s, and on the right side of my equation I have 8 -1s. So in this case I have a variable and a constant on one side. That's what makes it a two-step equation. I have to move that constant and part of my variable because I have multiple x's. All right, so in order to do this, we want to get the two x's by themselves. So if my goal is to get these by themselves, I'm going to need to move my constant first. And in order to get two -1s to the other side, I'm going to have to do the opposite or inverse operation. And when I say to the other side, remember the equal sign is where your equation is going to stay balanced. So these two -1s are going to have to add two 1s in order to zero those out. And if I add two 1s to the left side, I have to add two 1s to the right side. So that means that I'm going to also zero out these two pairs. So now what I'm left with are these two x's from the beginning. They're going to equal -6. So my last step is to split those 6 negatives into the two x groups. I want to find out how many of these 1s go in each group. So I can see here that this one's pretty easy to split down the middle. So these 3 negatives can go with this x, and then these 3 negatives can go with this x. So that means that each x here is equal to -3. So these 3 1s go with this x. Now, this is pretty easy visually to see what's going on, which is why it's a good thing to start out with a model. But let's go ahead and write out the equation and solve it the other way. So let's say that my equation is 2x minus 2 equals -8. So this is the original equation what I started with. I have 2x minus 2 equals -8. So I just wrote mathematically what my original problem said. Then I'm going to solve it just like any other two-step equation. Again, I want to split it down the equal sign. I'm going to have to move my -2 first, so I'm going to add 2. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other, so this is zeroed out. So on the left side, I have 2x equals, and we know a -8 plus 2 is -6. Don't forget your integer rules. So now my last step, I have to divide both sides in half in order to get my x by itself. And then I know that half of -6 is -3. So again, I end up with the same answer as my picture, x equals -3. When you start off with a model, sometimes it is easier to write the math equation that represents the model and then solve. Some of you might be better off using just the model. Others of you might like to write the equation and just solve the equation. Either way, you should get the same answer. But you always want to make sure that you follow all of your sign rules. Everything now is going to incorporate positives and negatives, and you have to make sure you understand those. Again, we have the same key. These algebra tiles are going to always be represented by the same color and shape. So your X's are always going to be represented by the bars or the rectangles, and your ones or your constants are always going to be represented by the squares. So here's problem 2, and this one, let's go ahead and write the equation before we actually solve it. So if I write out this equation, I have negative 4x, so that's what represents these 4 negative x's, and then I also have minus 3, and that all equals a positive 9. So all I'm doing is writing down exactly what the algebra tiles represent mathematically. Then I can solve my two-step equation. So in this case, if I solve it with the picture, the first thing I want to do is get rid of these 3 negatives. So I'm adding 3 to this side, which means I also have to add 3 to the other side. So these negative 3 positive 3's make 0. And then on the other side, I now have negative 4x equals 9 plus 3 is 12. So you can see here that since these are all positive on this right side, I am going to combine them and make the total of 12. So my last step here is to figure out how many of these 12 fit into each of these negative 4's evenly. So I'm just breaking them up evenly into 4 parts. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. And when I break it up into 4 equal parts, I can see that there are 3 per x. And since it is a negative x, dividing by negative 4, then my answer is going to end up being x equals negative 3. So I'm going to end up having each negative x has 3 ones, and you don't want to leave your negative with the x. You want your negative to be with the number. So that means that each x is worth negative 3. Now you can still go back and plug this in to your original problem to check your answer. And we did go over this in another video. But if I'm not sure if I'm correct or not, I can go with my original problem, negative 4, and instead of an x, I'm going to plug in negative 3 minus 3 equals 9. So the right side's already solved. All I'm doing is determining if this information also equals 9. This is where I have to be really careful with my sign rules, and I have to solve order of operations. So PEMDAS first, so multiply negative 3 times negative 4, which is 12. So now I have 12 minus 3, and that does equal 9. So since 9 equals 9, this does check out to be a true answer. I appreciate you following along today. I hope this really helped you understand not only the model with the algebra tiles, but also how to solve two-step equations. And then don't forget, you can always go back and check your answer to make sure that it is correct. I'm Mrs. D Math. This has been modeling and solving two-step equations in 7th grade math. Have a great day. Bye.